wondered why all the equal pay stuff was coming out now, but I guess equal pay day was last week or this week or something. I'm gonna
Oh,
look that up really quick.
okay. I'm gonna hit go live though right now because I have it up.
Okay, cool. Oh, we're live.
Are we? Okay.
It says
Ooh, we're doing
so.
it.
Hello.
Okay, here we are. Introduce us, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Erin, and I am the client success manager at Eris Conflict Resolution, and been hopping on with Meredith every week to just talk about the news and how we can stay engaged and stay healthy and safe. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna let
so Erin, every week she gets news alerts about workplace culture, sexual harassment, discrimination, and make sure that we're on top of it and that you're on top of it, but also that we can stay healthy around that. I'm Meredith Hawley. I'm a lawyer and certified life coach. And I founded Eris Conflict Resolution, where we help employees stop sexual harassment without quitting their jobs. So one of the most important thing that we talk about with stopping toxic work environments, harassment, discrimination is being willing to talk about difficult things. And so we want to get on and talk about difficult things in the news and stay in touch with that.
really getting to practice that very well and a lot right now in this
Yeah.
particular season.
Yeah. So I wanted to start out with just a small thing that I saw come up in the news today, which is about price gouging that's happening right now because the stores are out of toilet paper. And so I guess there are a number of places around Oregon, at least, that are charging exorbitant amounts for small rolls of toilet paper. And other sort of, I think that it also applies to, hand sanitizer, other supplies that are out in the stores in general. So what they're talking about in Oregon is creating a ceiling of what you can charge for those items so that it doesn't become a total racket. So if you're seeing something like that, I'm just going to see if I can share my screen here real quick. So what they say is you go in Oregon, you go to the Oregon Department of Justice Consumer Protection website. So justice.oregon.gov/consumer complaints. And you can just fill out this form and you can report anything that you see that seems like price gouging or just unfair, fraudulent business practices. Especially right now, I think that things are feeling a little bit free for all, and people are worried that if they make a complaint, it won't be listened to. But from the articles that I've seen, it does look like people are listening to the complaints. And this is from my experience also, as we continue to do our legal work and help employees on the legal side, things are continuing to be processed. People are showing up. And so if you're seeing something like this, I think reporting it is an important step that we can make towards creating a safer environment, taking action. All right. So you had a number of other things that you want to make sure.
Yeah. So obviously, I think people are starting to worry about unemployment and jobs and potential loss of jobs and income. And we know that is happening, and the service and hospitality and arts and entertainment are probably the hardest hit areas because all of those things just shut down. The unemployment is currently at like 3.3 million, which that seemed really high to me. But the article that I read said that during the financial crisis of 2008, it was like 570,000. So that's a pretty significant difference. But the good news is that Congress finally acted, got it together, and passed the relief bill, which will be addressing so many of the things that people are concerned about right now. The small businesses, it's got big extensions and expansions for unemployment, stimulus checks, like all that kind of stuff. So hopefully help is on the way and available here pretty soon.
Yeah, and I saw one thing that said that in Oregon, there were something like 76,000 applications for unemployment in one day last week. And I think that they are still processing unemployment. People are still working in the government agencies. The other thing to think about with this that I've been offering to some of our clients who have been laid off temporarily or permanently laid off, or who we have one client who quit her job right before all of this happened. But her employer wasn't going to lay people off anyway. But the thing that I think people can think about is there's like a huge need for employees in many areas. So for example, potentially government processing of unemployment shows that they're going to need to hire people to help process unemployment. You know what I mean? And there are articles, I didn't pull them up, but there are a number of articles. If you just Google who's hiring right now, there are all these articles about companies that are seeing a massive need for employees. And many of them, if you're high risk for COVID infection, if you have respiratory issues, or you're in the age group that's more susceptible to severe symptoms from COVID, there are a number of online businesses. I know my friend works for E-Trade and she lives in Salt Lake where they have their locations, but she's saying that they're just trying to hire, and everybody's working at home for many of these companies. Zoom, which we're on right now, is one that's hiring a number of just online companies where you may be able to work from home anyway. Others are like 7-Eleven, Pepsi.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say it is so fascinating, right? Because there's a lot of businesses that just had to shutter and people aren't working there right now. But then there are a ton of other businesses, as you mentioned, that are hiring and in need. So we have been social distancing, shelter in place, staying at home for, like, I think I counted the other day and we're on day like 19 or something. So we've been doing this for a little while, but I went out today to Target because I needed to pick up some essentials. And they had a bunch of people there, not a bunch, but they had like a group of people there totally spaced out and safe, waiting to interview. But they also were like very careful about like how people were like crossing each other in the store, at the checkout lanes. Like everything was very, like, never once did I come within like 6 feet of like anyone else. Even the checker, like we kept our distance, and she, was like, I bagged my own like groceries. Like it was very like they're taking, I think, as many precautions as they can, even in jobs like that, to like limit people to people interaction and contact. Yeah.
And I think, I've heard from a number of people that they genuinely have susceptibility to pneumonia or bronchitis or any kind of lung condition. So they don't want to even take a risk about that. And so I think for people who are not high risk, there are in-person jobs that potentially are options. And for people who are high risk, there are online jobs that are also options. So I think a lot of what I've seen is a lot of people think that if they look for another job now, they won't be reinstated into their old job. And that's likely not the case.
Right.
So there are options. I think we always have to be like, it's easy to feel hopeless. Like we've talked about, it's easy to feel stuck and confused. Like it's really easy to start to feel confused, but really, I think there are a number of actions that we can take. There's always something that we can do to take care of ourselves financially while things like this are happening.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, like just shifting perspective sometimes makes like all the difference. Easier said than done, but that can really make a big difference. I also think from like an employer standpoint or a business standpoint, it's a great time to examine how you want your business to look, either right now through all of this, or like when you come back, like what can you do to rebound with strength, and how do you want your company to be set up and to look? Because I know we're going to get into quality and like why that matters and how that impacts bottom line, and like caring for employees and employee retention and minimizing turnover and all that kind of stuff. Like this is a great time actually to be like dealing with those sorts of things and asking yourself those questions.
And I think that for a lot of business owners I've talked to, they feel so overwhelmed by making these decisions right now. How do you lay people off? How do you decide whether to lay people off? I'm actually going to create a diagnostic tool this afternoon for business owners that we can send out for how do you make these really difficult decisions, and how do you make sure that you're not making them from a discriminatory place or from even an unfair place. Most employers don't want to be even unfair, right? But also stay financially healthy, because if these companies don't stay financially healthy, nobody's going to get their jobs back, right? How do we make sure to protect employees now, but also not to sacrifice the business's financial health so that you can welcome employees back now? And I really think that when we're in a place where it feels really confusing, where it feels really overwhelming, it's hard to make good decisions. And ultimately, I think there's always opportunity to come back to the math of what does each position contribute to a company? What positions are like financially right now potentially able to be put on pause, right? And what positions are necessary to the current health of the company, right? And so like I see a lot of employers who really love their employees and really don't want anybody to get financially harmed, physically harmed in their jobs. And for those employers, like the danger is that you make a decision out of drama instead of out of math. And when we're making decisions out of confusion, out of overwhelm, out of drama, and sometimes drama can even look like this is my friend, right? Like making a decision out of that, then I think for those companies, it's going to be much harder to rebound when the economy gets successful. I think right now, companies are really having to know what the math is of how each position contributes to the financial health of the company.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Should we talk about the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap report?
Yeah, and I was going to share it, see if I can share this. It's super interesting. Potentially I just ruined everything.
Oh no.
I
can talk about it a little bit while you're trying to
talk about it because I can't see it now.
Okay. So according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report for 2020, North America won't see gender equality for 151 years. Which is crazy. But it talks about how gender parity can have a large impact on whether an economy or society will thrive. So again, this is a great time to be tapping into and talking about this kind of stuff, not to add something to the plate, but because it's gonna matter. Not that it doesn't now, but it really is going to make a big difference. So the gender gap definitely affects like power and influence in the rest of the world. And as a society, we in America are leaving a lot of money on the table by allowing the gender gap to continue.
Well, and I think this is such an interesting thing that also applies to the COVID pandemic. So I shared an article last week that was talking about the actual health danger of identifying diseases based on the location where they were first, first were discovered, right? And so it was saying that the danger of calling COVID the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus is that it makes it so that people think the danger is Chinese people or the danger is Wuhan, or that the danger only exists around Wuhan or around Chinese people. And so then we expose ourselves to the disease because that's not accurate. So it actually creates a health danger for us when we are identifying things according to something that's unrelated, right? And so that's always the danger of discrimination too, is like a thinking error where we're thinking women are bad at science, right? Like when we believe women are bad at science, we eliminate women from science, and then we don't get the benefit of discoveries where women are good at science, like of the discoveries of the people who have something to offer who have been removed. And I think a lot of times, for example, as women, like people who are raised as women, who are socialized as women, we often will even remove ourselves based on these wrong stereotypes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've talked about this before, and some of the stuff that we were reading definitely pointed to this as well. Just that the research shows that inclusive teams make better business decisions, like almost 90% of the time, which is a huge percentage. And the reason for that being is you have the different perspectives, you have new ideas, you have, like things that people who are all the same are not going to think of.
Right.
So, which again, like, as you said, going back to the numbers, going back to the math, like it gives you an automatic edge and definitely affects your bottom line if that is the case for you. I think it said, let me see if I can find this quote that I pulled out. So this McKinsey and Company analyzed more than 1,000 companies worldwide and proved that organizations with greater diversity among their executive teams had higher profits and longer term value, and companies with low rates of both gender and racial diversity are 29% more likely to make less money. So just like,
it's
even
so interesting. Yeah. And you even see this with governments in the book, Half the Sky. It talks a lot about these statistics. You even see in governments that like governments with all the genders versus and different races versus governments that are homogenous, have the countries have lower infant mortality rates. Like it contributes to survival to have. And I think that this is why it's so important to understand the difference between making decisions out of drama and making decisions out of math, because like math decisions look at your best candidates. They look at what positions in your workplace are contributing to the financial health of your workplace, what positions in the country are contributing to the overall health of the country. And when we're making decisions out of drama, a lot of times it looks nice. It looks like that person reminds me of myself, so I like them. It looks like, well, they're my friend. Or even like, well, they're supporting a family, or they are have this advantage or disadvantage. Sometimes you want to deliberately consider those things based on equity, right? Like based on giving people equal chance to offer their skills. But you always want to keep in mind, ultimately, what is the goal? What is the goal that you're trying to accomplish, to make your business healthy, to make your organization healthy, whatever it is.
Right. And even like from like a community, like individual perspective, it talks about it in Half the Sky, but I've seen this super clearly in Noonday, is that when women have jobs, they often will first take care of all the needs of their family and often like raise up whole communities of people, whereas that's not always true for the men necessarily. And
statistically, so like, that's what and I think sometimes people come back to a base level discrimination based on that, saying like men don't take care of families, or women are more nurturing or something like that. And I think most of that is just the way that we're socialized, right? Like women are socialized, people raised as women are socialized to think about the group, which is also valuable, right? Like that's the point. It's valuable that we've been raised to think about the group.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at the gender gap report, it's here at, you can just look up Global Gender Gap Report 2020. You can Google it, but it's at weforum.org, which is the World Economic Forum. That's where it comes from.
And to just talk like really briefly about how you recognize inequality, or like some things that gender equality consists of. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that you can look a lot just at numbers, right? Like, oh, do you mean like how to move towards equality?
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about some of the things that are laid out, but I think from your perspective too,
Yeah.
like work lends itself so well to this, and you deal with this every day, like see this all the time. So to just hear your voice on it would be good too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you want to look at your numbers always, like if it's in your business, if it's for yourself, right? It's a little different, but it always is related to your numbers. And the numbers are like what your income is, what your employees are paid. You want to know the numbers first, and the numbers are what show us, are things fair or are things not fair? Do your female employees take a higher number of sick days? Sometimes that can be an indicator that there's a discriminatory environment. It's not because women get sick more, right? But people often take a sick day when they're afraid to go to work, right? So numbers like that, numbers like people's wages, who do you have on your leadership team? What percentage of your leadership team is male? What percentage is other genders? Race too, same kind of issue, physical ability, age. You can look at a sexual orientation, all of these issues. What is the variety in your workplace? And then you want to ask why. What has led to the diversity or lack of diversity that you have in your workforce? Often what I see is employers say, I need a diverse candidate in this position, right? And that shows that they're not looking at diversity, they're looking at who is like them. We think a diverse candidate is someone that's not like me. So our natural inclination as humans, because we have human brains, is to identify with people who look like us. And then we need to deliberately look at that and instead come back to who's going to be the most successful candidate, have open hiring processes, right? And look at know the math of each position in your business so that you know whether somebody's successful or not successful, not based on your brain stereotypes of who's successful and what it looks like. So we also talk about, like, one thing that I think is really important is financial transparency, both in a business and position to positions, because a major contributor to the pay gap, to the gender pay gap, is that people don't know what a reasonable salary is for a position, and men are taught to aim higher than other genders. So specifically, people who have been socialized as women are not taught to aim higher. And so I think a lot of it, the most important thing is being deliberate and understanding that human brains have bias. Like, we just have thinking errors, and not attaching to the idea that for some reason you're exempt from that any of us are exempt from that.
Yeah, that was really good. I feel like you touched on pretty much all of them that we were going to touch on anyways. One thing, just kind of circling back around to the numbers and what someone is being paid for a position. One of these articles was saying that companies often base what they're going to pay someone based on their previous salary, and how that just like contributes to the wage gap.
And that's actually illegal in Oregon now. You're not allowed to ask past salaries, but it's not illegal everywhere else. But yeah, that is amazing. So you start out with inequality.
Right. Yeah. That's what they were like. This is like, it just keeps getting bigger because we keep doing that. So
yeah,
that was one thing. And then just equal access, I think, to training and career opportunities, like just being mindful of that, in addition to like the transparency and, creating that healthy culture.
Yeah. So a lot of times what you see is companies blaming behavior of a certain group of people for their lack of success, right? And what the research shows is actually that people behave pretty much the same, but people in the higher level treat them differently and have different expectations. So that's why it's so important, like, to speak to what you're saying, like equal training, equal like open job positions, or open hiring practices. So for example, there's that Harvard study. This is from a little while back now, but they had women and men wear behavior trackers. And because the suspicion was that women are less likely to ask for a raise, women are less likely to volunteer, like the lean in idea. And basically what the research showed was the opposite. Women and men were behaving at the exact same level, and they were being treated very differently by management. And I think that that's really interesting, because a lot of times women are scrutinized for their speech patterns, for their clothes, for all, but then if you look at it, men and women actually speak very similarly, and there's not.
This is like a perfect time to bring in Taylor Swift again. I mean, how do we keep coming back to Taylor Swift? But her song, The Man, the video for that. But as soon as, it's funny because Lorelai like gravitated to that song hardcore when that album first came out. And I was like, I don't hate that you love that song. Like, it's so true. Like, it really is true, because it's basically her talking about like, if she went out there and like flaunted who she was and the position that she has, the way that like, say like a male rapper does, like she would be labeled very differently and treated very differently.
But then we have to ask, is that do we like that reason for not doing it? I think that is more of a reason to do it, because I think what happens is women encounter more scrutiny. And so then we try to manage ourselves around the scrutiny, which assumes that the scrutiny has some kind of validity.
Then there's a lot of drama, because then you have the drama of like managing yourself and other people. It's like too much. It's too many things.
It's too much, and it doesn't work anyway, right? Yeah. Like, if we could change our clothes and then not be scrutinized, boy, we would have solved that problem a long time ago. Unfortunately, it doesn't work.
Now that I'm paying attention to the news, like all this stuff is coming to mind. But apparently there was a Marilyn Monroe thing where like somebody was like, oh, like her fame is only due to like her looks or whatever, and she like wore a potato sack or like a burlap sack or something like that, like one of her photo shoots, to be like, all right.
Yeah.
Or like her clothes or something.
Right. And I think so when I see with our clients, when I see them getting overly scrutinized, I think lean into that. Like, what are you going to do? How is that a good sign? And how are you going to turn that into an advantage for yourself, and not pretend that we are equally scrutinized or that things are the same, but how do we treat ourselves with the respect to say, this person's wrong about me and I'm going to show up more.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And that's a perfect like segue into our next thing that we were going to talk about. So there is this group, they're calling them the Gen Z STEMinists, but they're like basically young women in the STEM field, which is science, technology, engineering, math, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're basically working to end the gender gap in the STEM fields. They're creating all these programs that create access and just kind of like drawing attention to the fact that like even still in education, like women and especially minority women are like very underrepresented in these fields. Education has gotten a little better, but like for sure in the career field, they're still very underrepresented. There's a lot of like discrimination and harassment in that field, like in particular. So these young women are just like doing their thing and it's pretty cool.
So like this woman is, can you see this?
Yes.
Article. So this woman is 17.
And she's from Seattle. She's the one that's from Seattle. She created the EduSTEM initiative. And so this is a quote from her, which is so great. She says, perspective turns into ideas, ideas turn into solutions, solutions turn into impact. Diversity in STEM is crucial to bring these different perspectives to the table. When a narrow demographic, for example, white or Asian, middle to upper class males, controls a narrative that impacts everyone, the results will never account for diversity and perspective, which is critical to create sustainable, meaningful impact. STEM is about always building, creating, and expressing how people view the world through a problem solution lens, and everyone should be and needs to be included in that process.
So awesome. I love it. And then
so great.
This whole article, this has a bunch of young women who are just making amazing contributions. You also were talking about one woman who had say what it is, the particle accelerator.
Yeah, so we'll link that article of the Gen Z STEMinist so you guys can read it if you want to. But like the reason that's important and like going off of that quote from Archika, I think is how you say her name, about how everyone needs to be involved and bring their solution to problems that they're seeing. This is like a perfect example of this, but there is a physicist from Chicago who essentially created this particle accelerator thing. It's a machine that is enabling scientists right now to analyze COVID-19, to create a model of its protein structure, to figure out basically how the disease works, why it's disguising itself from our immune system, and how it attaches to like the various different organs in the body, like the lungs and stuff like that. So if they can figure out how it works and what it's doing, that's how we come up with like the way to treat it and the way to like end it. So it's so cool, like her work, this machine that she created, and she created it like years ago. They've used it for all kinds of different research, like AIDS and cancer and like all kinds of stuff, but it is particularly useful right now because it's the thing that's allowing us to figure out COVID and how it works.
So cool.
I know. I was geeking out. I was like, I didn't know particle accelerator was like an actual thing.
Right. Not just on the Flash.
That's I know the words from the Flash, but like that is so cool.
So cool. So yeah, I mean, I think that these just show what is possible when people really show up with all of their skills and talents. And I think you see on both sides, like these women face a lot of backlash just for being women, just for being people of color, just for having these characteristics that we randomly identify as negative, right? And then what if they didn't even have to think about that? Like, what if they weren't presented with that externally? And what if we didn't absorb that as women? How would we show up more? And I think it is on both sides, right? Like, I don't think that we're powerless to show up and treat it as a good sign when we're facing backlash. But I also think that like, if society wasn't so fixated on who is better in the hierarchy based on random characteristics that are unrelated to our talents and skills, then, you know, what would be possible for us?
Totally. I love that. I love that so much. And that kind of like brings us around to like what we kind of wanted to end with, in just like the idea of like showing up right now and doing like what you can with what you have, and like bringing your full self to the table. And like the people who are doing that are leading out at this moment, you know, like we have sort of a void, at least here in America, of like leadership happening,
Yeah.
like that is super impactful across the board. And so then you see different people who are stepping up in different ways, like, you know, the governors in the states like stepping up to do their thing for the states, like our governor, our New York and California, I think like have taken some pretty strong like stances of like, this is how we're gonna like get through this. But also like I read this thing about Rihanna, how Rihanna just like under the radar like donated like $5 million to get PPE to New York. She bought enough ventilators for her entire like home island of Barbados. Like she just contributed like all this money to like go towards like all these different things that are actually going to make a like real significant difference in COVID right now. And like most of us don't have like $5 million, but then there's like other stories going around of like, there's the gal who was like going to the grocery store, and she happened to like make eye contact with this elderly woman in the car, and this little old couple had been sitting in their car for hours trying to find someone that they could trust enough to go in and buy their groceries for them, because they were so scared to go into the store. And so they made eye contact with this woman. They had like a short little conversation between like the glass of the car, and they like tucked their money out through the window to her, and she went and bought them all their groceries because they were too scared to like go in and shop. And so I think it just like, it really is like speaking volumes right now, like your actions, but also showing up as your full self and doing like what you can, whatever that like looks like, you know, even if it's just like checking in on a friend, or like, you know, buying groceries for the elderly couple, or whatever it is that you can do right now is really making a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that also one thing, Rebecca G and I are gonna do a Facebook Live on Friday about this, about when you live alone, how do you
Yeah.
deal, how do you handle, because there's a lot of information about families and staying organized and not getting too overwhelmed with kiddos at home. And then less, I guess, information about when you're alone. And I think that like something that sort of speaks to what you're talking about with like getting help and reaching out for help, and how do we still stay connected in the grocery store parking lot with our community when we need help, right? And I think that like the thing that, you know, we all I think have experienced is you can feel lonely or stuck in a crowd of people or alone at home, right? Because it's our thoughts that create our feelings, not our external environments. And so I think now is this intense time to really take a look at the places that we do feel stuck or like we can't get help, and the places that we feel helpless of helping other people, right? And then like really question those things and know that we can always make a contribution and an impact and make help, and, you know, let ourselves feel any of the feelings that are coming up for us at the same time.
I think that's really important, because I think it's hard, like it's hard for everyone right now. Like it's hard all around. And so like I think like just being willing to admit that it's hard, you know, like to keep the perspective of like, just by virtue of the fact that we're sitting here on Zoom, like in America, in our houses with our food, like we're so much better off than so many other people in so many other places. But also it's still hard. Like you're on your own, and I'm with my family trying to like co-work with my husband and like teach my child while I'm working. And, you know, like it's all just like a hot mess, and we're going to get through it together. But like to know that it's okay, like whatever you're feeling right now, like is
Yeah.
totally fine.
Yeah. We did also want to talk about the Joe Biden thing. I put it on our
Oh,
list.
yes.
And
Oh,
we,
yeah.
yeah, we
Yeah.
can end on I mean, I don't think it's a bummer note because I think that it is like, so do you want to give the little update?
Yeah, I don't know too much about it. I just barely saw the article that came out the other day.
Okay, I can talk about it because I read a little bit more about it. So
Okay.
Joe Biden has been accused of sexual assault from back in the 90s.
Well, and it was a gal who had spoke out about him previously, but
Mhm.
she is kind of amending her story now. Like she's basically saying, actually, this whole thing happened, and I
Mhm.
wasn't ready to share that yet.
Yeah, it was a more extreme experience that she's reporting than she initially talked about. And then some celebrities have criticized the news media for not paying more attention to this allegation. I mean, I think that in part Joe Biden was involved in the Anita Hill hearings, and there's a lot of not very favorable footage of how that was handled on his side. And his statement is something along the lines of, I've always touched people a lot. And now people's boundary, like people are setting more self-protective boundaries around touching. Um, I think that partly that does acknowledge, I think it is important when we think we do want to change our behavior to acknowledge that we want to change it. I think that on the one hand is a important way to address all of this, is not to defend ourselves and say that what we did was right in the past, but to say, like, even if we disagree, I don't want to, with the memories that somebody's reporting, to say, I don't want, that's not how I want to behave, right? This is behavior that I don't want to have. But I think that it really speaks to, I think Joe Biden has an image of being like a family man, a man of the people, very approachable. And I think it speaks to how much culture has changed about what that means and what's
Mhm.
acceptable in that kind of image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know. I I I feel like, I mean, it I don't know. It seems like everyone, right? Like it seems like anymore, nobody is above reproach on this like
Yeah.
topic, which is a bummer. But
I mean, it's kind
hopefully,
of a bummer, but it's also like, I think that we need to acknowledge that. And what do we want to do with it? Right.
and
And
also,
I think we can get really partisan about it and say, no, 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 no. If it's about Joe Biden, it's a lie. But if it's about Donald Trump, it's the truth, or the reverse. If it's about Joe Biden, it's true. But if it's about Donald Trump, it's a lie. And I think that kind of misses the opportunity that we're having as a culture to just say, this is how we've been behaving.
yeah. Well, and I think that's super important. And kind of the point I was making is like, whether you think someone is like nice, genuine, charismatic guy or not, does not matter at all in the grand scheme of things when it comes to this particular issue, because as we know, that is often the case. Like
Right.
it's not always like the sketchy, creepy guy that you like
Right.
would think.
And there's that like research based cognitive error called the halo effect that we have. So we think if somebody's a good dad, they can't have touched somebody inappropriately. And what is actually true is that both can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, and so how do we allow our friends, our heroes, whoever, to be held, our enemies, to be held accountable for specific behavior, um and even allow them to have the opportunity to say, I also don't like that behavior, if they want to, right?
Mhm.
Like, I engaged in that behavior and it was wrong and I regret it, whatever that opportunity is, to for all of us to change.
For sure.
Yeah.
So this may not be the time or place to do this, but walk me through this. if we end up with Trump and Biden as the picks for November, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that Trump is just going to be president again, if that's I just think that to me, that's the reality of, and I think a lot of people feel like that. I feel like there's a lot to like about Biden.
I just mean then we have two, right? Like we have said, we're not ready for a woman president, but it's fine that we have two men who have both been accused of like
yeah,
sexually harassing.
But I think that that's insightful of where we are as a culture, right? Like when Me Too came out, most women weren't shocked that everybody had experienced it because we know that this is how we are as a culture. We embrace violence against women. We often like watch TV shows that even glorify violence against women or make it seem super fancy. Like it is how we behave as a culture. And so then I think with that, I mean, like this is what I always think is like, that means each of us in our individual stories with our families, with our communities need to share our experiences, our like, not as a group, not as like posse of women who are angry, but like our individual experiences of what it means to us that we're a culture that embraces men who are accused of sexual assault, but not women who are very smart and educated and qualified for positions, and that we feel safer with that. I mean, the research shows that we, like as a society, are inclined to feel safer with a man who's very tall, who's been accused of violent crimes, than with a woman who's shorter and is qualified for a position. And it's bias, right? And until we question that, I think we're going to keep having the same results.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, and not to end on a totally discouraging note, because I think that like you see women like Rihanna really making an impact, and she gets criticized up and down, right? Mm-hmm. And what if she sat at home? What if Taylor Swift sat at home because people are mean to her? Not to criticize any woman who chooses that or who has like we all need to make our own choices. But I always think, what if these women that I admire got so discouraged and were so ready to give up,
right,
instead of taking it as a sign that we're in the right place and this is why we're here.
That's good.
So anyway, that's my pep talk about that. Everybody run for president.
Yeah.
Yes. Run for state offices. Go make your contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ask any questions. Tell us what you want us to talk about in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And if you have specific situations that you're working through right now, you can also reach out to us anytime.
Yeah, a lot of people that I've been seeing have been struggling with whether they have to go to work or not, and then what layoffs mean and how to get into a good replacement job or how to handle the unemployment situation. And I think there are a lot of solutions to that. And yeah.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. I can just